I was a pastor for probably about 7 years or so, and I had sung that song, Holy, 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 my whole life. And I'd sung that verse, Here I raise my Ebenezer, my whole life. And I had no idea what an Ebenezer was. What's an Ebenezer? Does anybody know what an Ebenezer is?
A monument or a pillar of rock.
That's right. It's a monument or a pillar. It's something that if God did a great work, somebody would find the biggest rock they could find, and they'd set it up in a place that didn't belong, so that when everybody else would come by, they'd look at this rock and they'd say, what in the world is this rock doing here? Why is this monument right here? And then someone would come along and say, well, that's where God delivered his people. That's where he led them across the sea. That's where he saved them from captivity. And I believe that all of us are called to be Ebenezers. We're all called to be men who have had such a dramatic work of God in us, such a dramatic deliverance from sin, from death, from whatever it is, that people look at us and they say, what happened to you? And you can say, here's what God did for me. Here's how God delivered me. And we ourselves become these living Ebenezer stones. That being said, where was I? So I had surrendered to alcoholism, right, and surrendered all this to God, and I had learned to cooperate with Jesus. I hope that doesn't freak you out too much, but cooperating with God is kind of going to be the theme here again this morning. After I had surrendered all these things and learned my first little steps, I was a spiritual baby. I was a pastor of a congregation who had gone to seminary, and I had to admit that I was a spiritual infant. But early on, those first few months of my spiritual infancy, I was very excited. I was having the time of my life. I was free from this terrible obsession that had plagued me for so many years of my life. But I had a new problem. You see, if you're like me and God sets you free from alcoholism, he sets you free from having to drink every day, something strange happens. Because not drinking doesn't solve any of your problems. It actually reveals what your real problems are. Alcohol was my idol. It was my primary idol in my life, and now my primary idol had been taken away. And it started to reveal that I had all kinds of other idols waiting in line to take its place. One of my first big problems after I was set free from this was that I began to feel everything. I had no idea what normal people went through on a daily basis, because whenever I felt discouraged, I would drink. Whenever I felt angry, I would drink. Whenever I felt whatever, I would drink. And now I wasn't drinking anymore, and I was feeling all of these feelings. And then I began to discover what normal people do. They get all kinds of other character defects, and they get all kinds of other coping mechanisms. I realized during this time when I was set free that I was a pretty bad husband. I was a lousy father. I was not a very good friend. I hadn't been a good pastor. And all these things started to weigh on me. And some of my character defects, my coping mechanisms started to creep up. And I got a problem with lust. I hadn't been that big of a problem while I was drinking, but once I was finished drinking, this lust starts creeping back in. This anger. I'm going to control things by getting angry and getting my own way. This anger started to creep back up. I was a smoker back then too. And so I found myself going from about a half a pack a day to about 2 packs a day, because I just needed something to take the edge off of life. I needed to cope now that I was feeling all of these feelings. And I also learned that AA, as wonderful as it had been to me, AA was not going to solve all of these other problems for me. AA, they talk about alcohol, and that's it. One of the little sayings we have there in Alcoholics Anonymous is, what do you call a horse thief who stopped drinking? A sober horse thief, right? He's not drinking, he's still doing all the same crap he did before. And so I was doing all these things, and all these character defects started coming up. And AA wasn't going to solve them. And I was looking for something. We were just talking here this morning, and somebody mentioned, wouldn't it be great if God just had a big old flashing neon sign saying, this is the way that I want you to go? And he kind of does. It's not neon and it's not right in front of you. But he's given us his word. And in that word, if we meditate on it, I love these meditations that we're doing. if we meditate on it and we dig into it and we pull out what He's offering us, we can find the way that He wants us to go. So, I had this problem here. I was feeling all these things. My character defects were coming up. AA wasn't going to solve my problem. And about 5 months into my sobriety, God revealed something to me that has radically changed my life. I was driving. I wake up every morning, and I start thanking God for my wife and my kids. And I get in the shower, and I start singing some praise songs. And I get in my car, and I was driving to my meeting to hang out with all my drunk friends. And I was driving there, and I was going about 75 miles an hour. And the speed limit was 65. And it just suddenly hit me like a ton of bricks. I don't know why, but this day it hit me. I break the law. And I don't even think about it. I so willfully just do what I want. I want to get there a little bit faster. And so every day of my life, me and 10,000 of my closest friends, we just break the law willy-nilly, and it doesn't even bother me. But that day, for some reason, it bothered me. And God started doing this work, and He said, Eric, there's so many areas of your life that need to get cleaned up. But we're going to start easy. I'm going to start easy with you. And I just want you to do this one thing. I want you to obey the speed limit. Just do that. It sounds like a huge thing, right? But I was like, all right, Lord, I'm gonna obey the speed limit. And so I slowed down to 65, and I got into my meeting. And the next day, I followed the speed limit everywhere that I went. But it was the third day that was the real problem. You see, on the third day, my wife and I were going to take the family from San Diego, California to Detroit, Michigan in a car to go visit my wife's family. And I told her, that morning I woke up and I said, honey, I got to tell you something. God's doing this work in me. And, I'd only been sober like 5 months, so she was looking at me out of the corner of her eye the whole time, just waiting for me to go back into all these other ways of behaving. And so she looked at me and I said, honey, I have to drive the speed limit. We have to drive the speed limit the whole way to Detroit and back. And she got pissed at me. I don't know what God's telling you. She said, you're gonna drive the whole way by yourself if that is what the deal is. And so I said, okay. And so I got in the car and we loaded up the family, and she was mad at me. She didn't talk to me for like 3 hours, starting off on this trip. But I started driving, and I was going the speed limit. And I don't know if you've ever taken a trip from San Diego to Detroit, Michigan, but you go through deserts, and you go over mountains, and you drive across plains and prairies, and it's some of the most beautiful scenery you'll ever see in your life. And my wife, she wouldn't talk to me, and she went to sleep, and the kids were sleeping in the back, and I was just sitting there obeying God for thousands of miles, and I was free. And I felt such peace. I wasn't worried about cops pulling me over. Every once in a while, someone would drive by and give me the bird because I was going too slow. But that was the worst that happened to me. I was obeying God, and I experienced the most amazing peace that I had ever experienced in my life. And it rocked my world because every day at lunchtime, when I first got sober, I would go to this place on 2nd Street in Encinitas, California, and it was a place where alcoholics got together, and I would go to this meeting, and on the wall there were these promises. And they said, if you do these things, all these promises are going to come true. And right in the middle of those promises, there's this one little line, and it said, you will know peace. And I didn't believe it. I had never been at peace ever in my life. I was always worrying about what people thought of me. I was always worrying about succeeding or whatever it was. I was always fretful and full of fear and full of anxiety. And that day, that promise came true for me. I knew peace for the first time because I obeyed God. The psalmist writes in Psalm 119, it says, oh, how I love your law. I meditate on it all day long. I had never loved the law of God. Because what the law of God did to me when I was learning the 10 Commandments, I looked at those commandments and I'm like, well, I'm keeping a few of these things. And then you really get into it and you start learning the deeper meaning of those commandments. And you're like, man, I can't even keep one of these. I may not have murdered somebody, but I sure have hated somebody. I'm failing in all these ways. And Jesus comes along and he starts talking about things in the Sermon on the Mount. He's like, you say the law says to you that you shouldn't cheat on your spouse. I say if you've even looked with lust at another woman, you have completely failed to keep that law. Who here has never looked at another woman with lust in your heart? That's what I thought. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I would look at this and it says, he's sitting there going, how I love your law. I can't get enough of it. And it wasn't until that day that I started obeying the speed limit that this thing suddenly came to life for me. That it wasn't about this law that condemns me, but it was about a law that set me free, that was teaching me how to live in this world where all I wanted was to know, how do I stop feeling like this? How do I stop getting into trouble? How do I stop making messes everywhere I go? And the law of God started to reveal little bit by little bit how to set me free. I ran across this book by an amazing guy named E. Stanley Jones. Anybody ever hear of E. Stanley Jones? I'm always blown away by that. Because in the early part of the 20th century, he was one of the most famous and preeminent theologians in America. He had been a missionary over to India, and he was good friends with Mahatma Gandhi. And he was a Methodist pastor, and he wrote so many things, and he blessed so many people, and now he's completely forgotten in our day and age. But I ran across some of his work, and he wrote this book called Abundant Living. And it was a daily devotional. And so every day I would get up and I would read a little word from God, and I would read some thoughts by E. Stanley Jones, and I would say a little prayer at the end of this. And what he was doing in here is he was unpacking for me the secrets of the universe. Because the truth is, if Jesus is who he says he is, and I believe he is, then he's the creator of the universe. Amen? And so this universe that we live in must be a Christian universe. Created by Christ, it must be a Christian universe. It operates according to Christian principles and fundamentals. And if we can somehow learn what those Christian principles and fundamentals are, we're going to stop bumping into every sharp corner that this universe has to offer. Because that's what I was doing. I was violating all these principles and all these laws of God, and I was bumping into every corner, and I was hurting myself and other people. And when I started to unpack these things and learn what God was saying, here's what I want to give you instead of this crap that you're doing. I want to give you something beautiful. I want to teach you my ways. And that's what the psalmist was saying. I can't get enough of the law of God because it's showing me how to live an abundant life. It's showing me how to stop hurting myself and other people. And so I started to experiment with that. I started to say, God, what's the next thing you want to teach me? As I mentioned last night, I had to make this character defect list as part of my process of getting better. And my list was long. And it was daunting to think, man, here's all these things that are wrong with me. How am I possibly going to tackle all this stuff? And my beautiful priest sponsor, Father Michael, he said, we're going to do this one thing at a time. And so I would look at this list and I would pray. I said, God, what do you want me to tackle? And he said, I want you to deal with the thing that's causing you the most problems in your life right now. And so I would look at that list and I'd look at it and I'd see, well, this is the number one thing that's causing me the most trouble right now. And what God had done for me by setting me free from alcoholism was that in a 90-day period of time, he radically changed the course of my life. And so I took that number. It means something to me. It's just an arbitrary number to anybody else, but it means something magical to me. And so I said, God, for 90 days at a time, I'm going to take that number one character defect of mine, and I'm going to learn as much about it as possible. I'm going to learn what you want to give me in my life instead of this defect of character that I'm falling into over and over again. And I'm going to start searching out, how can I replace this defect with your will for my life? So that's what I did. I started to live my life 90 days at a time. And I think this is what King David was talking about. In Psalm 57, he said, my sin is always before me. And that kind of sounds a little morbid at first, right? He's just thinking about his sin all the time. He feels so guilty or so full of shame. And I've been there, and I know you guys have been there too. You're just so overwhelmed by your sin, and it's just sitting there in front of you. But as I meditated on that psalm and as I studied it some more, one thing became clear. He wasn't morbid about it, because the rest of the song is this uplifting, wonderful thing. What he's talking about is it's a military term. And if you're in the military, you know this. What happens when your enemy gets behind you? You're done, right? He will take you out. And so King David is saying, I know what my failings are. I know what my struggles are. I know the things that come in and wipe me out all the time. And I'm going to keep those things in front of me. I'm not going to let it get around me. If I got a lust, David had a lust problem, right? David, you better keep that lust in front of him. You got an anger problem, you better keep that anger in front of you. And so I would take these character defects, and every 90 days, I would say, what's causing me the most problems? And I would set it in front of me, and I would not let it get behind me until God had given me at least a little bit of progress over vanquishing that foe. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I learned, because I tackled a whole bunch of these character defects in my life. I know some of you are struggling with these very same things because there's nothing new under the sun. You're not unique. I thought I was terminally unique. I wanted to be the cool pastor. I wanted to be the guy who was a Lutheran, but I was a hip Lutheran. There's no such thing as a hip Lutheran, amen? But I wanted to be that guy, and I was so terminally unique I was going to kill myself. But there is nothing unique about any problem that you're facing. And so as I did this, I put them 90 days in front of me. Here's what I learned about some of my more glaring character defects. My first biggest problem was I was a lousy husband. And I had been doing premarital counseling for years, and I'd been doing marriage counseling for years. And I sat there sober, looking at my life, thinking about my relationship, and I had no idea how to heal this. I had no idea how to love my wife well. And so I went searching, and I found this amazing resource called Defining the Relationship. It's by a guy named Danny Silk. And I looked in this, and I humbled myself, and I just learned. And I watched all these videos, and I read all these books, and I started to learn some basic marriage skills. I thought, well, I'll just love my wife, and these things will kind of come naturally to me. And I couldn't have been further from the truth. I had to discover what God wanted me to do. I had to discover, how does Jesus love his bride? Maybe I should start loving my bride the way that Jesus loves his bride. And one of the best things that I ever learned was this thing that he said. He said, anytime you have to talk about something difficult, and if you're married, you know you're often going to have to talk about difficult things. Anytime you're going to have to talk about something difficult, imagine that you're trying to touch the other person's eyeball. And I thought, man, that's brilliant. Because when my wife says anything negative towards me, it's like she's poking me in the eye, right? But if she could just gently and lovingly think of the kindest words, and if I could just think of the kindest words in the gentlest way to help her see some things that need to get taken care of, man, we're going to touch each other's eyeball, give each other permission to help clean each other up a little bit. And that has saved us so many times. And then I thought about it some more. I'm like, that's exactly what Jesus was talking about. If you want to help somebody get the speck out of their own eye, you got to take that giant 2x4 out of your own eye first, clean up your own life. But then you got to gently touch their eyeball in order to help them. I learned a lot of other things about marriage, but that was one that just sticks with me, and it's helped change how my wife and I communicate. The next thing that was on my character defect list was not only was I a bad husband, but I was a pretty lousy father. Got 2 great kids, and my wife had protected them from me for so long, but my kids were scared of me. And that was a terrifying and humbling revelation when I had these 2 kids that I love so much, and they were afraid to spend time with their dad. And so I went to my sponsor, Father Mike, and I'm like, Father Mike, what do I do here? I have damaged these children. And he's like, Eric, it's pretty simple. Whatever your natural instinct is, just do the opposite, right? Whatever first comes to mind, forget that and do the opposite of that. I'm like, I can do that because I have all these great ideas. And if I just get rid of those great ideas and I do the opposite of them, I'm going to see how life works out. And so I would isolate. I was an isolated drinker. I never went to bars. I never drank with other people. I drank alone in my car about a block from my house, so I wouldn't have to drive very far. And I wouldn't spend time with my kids. And so I just started to spend a lot of time with my kids. And lo and behold, they started to like hanging out with me. And I kept doing the opposite with my children of what I was doing before. And before very long, because your kids, especially if they're young, little ones like mine were, they want more than anything to have a relationship with you. And so I was able to bring healing to those two kids. And man, we got such a great relationship now, just because I learned how to do the opposite. And I also learned that I was going to start, instead of punishing and trying to control my kids, like I was controlled and punished when I screwed up. That's just kind of what we do. It's, we kind of are proud about it, right? Good little spanking never hurt anybody, right? That's what I thought. But instead of trying to control and punish my kids into good behavior, I learned how to give them choices and introduce consequences into their lives. I was telling them what to do. Anytime they had a problem, I was like, well, do this, don't do this. And if you don't do what I told you to do, I'm going to punish you. And instead I started to give them choices that they had to make. And the funniest thing happened when my wife and I, we were reading all these books, and we were going to do this. We're going to start giving our kids choices because we want them to grow up to be powerful people. Because the last thing we want on earth is for our 18-year-old children to leave the house and never learn how to make a choice for themselves. Because they're about to walk out into this great big world and get 100 million choices thrown at them. And if we haven't trained them to discern what is good and what is bad, they're going to repeat my mistakes. I mean, they're going to make plenty of their own, but they're going to repeat the same. I got freedom for the first time, and I went crazy. And I don't want that to happen to my kids. And so they were 9 and 7 years old, and we said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to let you guys decide from now on whether or not you're going to obey. We're going to let you decide. And we're not giving them like all kinds of choices. We're giving them like 2 choices, right? You can either do this or you can do this. Because we're trying to teach them to make choices. And within 5 hours of us starting this new parenting style, my beautiful, intelligent children had made picket signs. And they were walking around the kitchen going, bring back mom and dad, bring back mom and dad. Because they're like, what are we supposed to do? And we realized just how bad it had gotten. We had told them and controlled them. They didn't know what to do when faced with making a decision. They've learned and they've become powerful little kids who know right from wrong and can choose right from wrong. It's been an amazing thing to watch. Another thing that I had to deal with was my smoking. You ask my kids, they didn't care less about my drinking, but the smoking was the problem because they were in school and they watch TV, and smoking's going to kill you. And they knew that Dad smelled bad, and they were tired of this, and they were worried about me living or dying. And so it was just convicted on my heart, man, I really need to stop smoking. The only problem was I didn't want to stop smoking. I enjoyed smoking. Man, getting 5 minutes, hitting that nicotine rush, a little peace of mind, I loved every aspect of it. So I asked my sponsor, Father Mike, what do I do? He's like, if you're not willing to give up this character defect, what you need to start doing is asking God every day to give you the willingness to finally be done with it. So for every day, I'll say, God, I'm not willing. You know I'm not willing, but please make me willing. Change my heart. And I prayed that prayer every day for 9 months, and one day I was sitting in the car, and I was reading, I was smoking a cigarette, and I was reading a daily devotional, and it was about quitting smoking, of all things, right? And God spoke to me through this devotional, and He didn't say it in a loud voice that you can like split heaven or anything like that, but He spoke to my heart, and He said, Eric, you can be done with this right now for the rest of your life if you obey me. Or you can struggle with this for a very long time. I said, God, make me willing. And I took my cigarettes and I took all the stuff, and I had a whole lot of paraphernalia in my car, and I went to the nearest dumpster and I dumped it in. And then God said, I'm going to give you something different. I want you to go home now. And I know you're out of shape and you've been smoking for 15 years. I want you to go home and work out. I said, really? And so I went home. I put on some workout clothes that I could find because I hadn't worked out in 10 years. And I started walking around this lake by our house. And as I was walking around that lake, he said, not only do I want you to give up smoking and replace it with working out, I want you to take all that money you're going to save and I want you to give it away. I'm like, really, Lord? Because, I mean, that's $400 a month I was spending on this nonsense. And so I took that $400 and I gave it to widows and orphans in India. Because I'd been to an India trip just a couple years before that. And so he wanted to teach me something in that whole experience. He wanted to say that if you want to give up a character defect, you can't just leave it out there. Jesus tells this parable about this person who had a demon inside of them, and he casts this demon out, right? And then this person is empty, and they never do anything. They're just walking around living life, and this demon's out of them. But the demon starts going, hey, I'm kind of bored out here. I'm kind of lonely out here. I'm going to get some of my friend demons. And then their friend demons get together, and they go looking for this person again. And they're like, look, there's nothing inside this person. And so they came in. All of them came in. And it was worse than before. And what God was teaching me is that if we're going to overcome any of our character defects, we're going to have to replace them with something better, something that is from God. So these character defects are getting cleaned up. But I had plenty more. And as I was going through, the next thing on my list was my anger, because I was angry almost all the time. Anybody got an anger issue? A room full of men. You know there's some anger in this room, right? I had some anger issues, and so I started to do this 90-day research saying, what does anger do to my life? And what I learned was that anger says, you owe me. I'm angry because you owe me something. You owe me respect. You owe me money. You owe me something, and I'm getting angry about it. And I also learned that anger is just a form of fear. Self-centered fear. That's why, we get afraid. We want to control the situation. And the easiest way we can think of it, we're going to scare somebody. We're going to get angry about this, and we're going to get our way. And so I was thinking, well, what's the opposite of fear? Anybody know what the opposite of fear is? It's not faith. The Bible says this. It says, perfect love casts out all fear. And so I had an anger problem, and anger is a form of self-centered fear, and perfect love casts out fear. Love is the opposite of fear. And so what I learned I had to do was to deal with my anger problem. I had to up my love quotient. I had to start hanging out with people who loved me and I loved. I had to get into a relationship with God that was filled with love. The passage that we have for this session here today says that he's going to show us a more excellent way. Eagerly desire the greater gifts because I'm going to give you a more excellent way. This is the very last verse of 1 Corinthians 12. And what's 1 Corinthians 13 all about? Love. It is the great love chapter of the Bible. Love is patient, love is kind. Man, if you want to look at your life and be humbled, read 1 Corinthians 13 and see how far you fall from being a person who loves well. But I started figuring out that the perfect love was going to cast out this fear. And when I started to fill myself with love, my anger started to dissipate. Another thing I learned about my anger was that I had to lower my expectations. We live in a world that says you gotta set the bar real high. You gotta have high expectations for you and the people around you if you hope to succeed. And what I learned from some great people was that I have to keep my expectations on the floor for other people. Because other people are sickos. Amen? They got some weird, twisted problems. They got stuff I don't even know what they're dealing with. But they do stupid things all the time, other people. Occasionally I do too. But other people especially do these weird things. And so I had to lower my expectations. I had to start treating them like I would a person who's got cancer. I'm not going to walk into somebody's cancer room in the hospital and say, what's wrong with you? Why don't you just get over it? Get up and start walking around. I would never do that because I'm not a jerk, totally. somewhat, but a little bit. I'm not totally a jerk. I would never do that. And so I started looking at people as though they were sick. And I said, I'm going to keep my expectations really low for everybody that I meet. I'm just going to expect you guys to fall asleep while I'm talking. I'm going to expect you guys to not pay attention. I'm going to expect you guys to say something mean to me after this. And then the most amazing thing started to happen to me. When I had these low expectations, people exceeded them all the time. Occasionally someone would say something nice to me. Occasionally someone would do something nice for me. And I would just be blown away. I would be surprised by joy. I'd be like, wow, you're amazing. But when my expectations were here, you never met them. You were never giving me what I wanted. You were never praising me enough. You were never helping me enough. But when my expectations were on the floor, you were always exceeding them. And so I got to walk around delighted for the first time in my life. And anger has a hard time competing with delight. Another one of my character defects was jealousy. And jealousy says that God or the universe or the world owes me something. Jealousy says, I'm not getting enough. And when I look around and I see all these other people and what they got, I want what they have, and somebody owes me this. God at least owes me something better than what I have. And jealousy is contagious, isn't it? We talked about this last night. When we start competing and comparing, we start working off of each other. We start being contagious to each other. And rather than saying, how can we cooperate? I got so much stuff. How can I be a blessing to other people? Instead of saying that, it's like, how can I get more for myself? Jealousy was a problem for me. And so I got into God's Word, and I started saying, God, what do you want to give me instead of this jealousy? And you know what He gave me instead? You know what the opposite of jealousy is? Celebration. So when my buddy gets the job that I wanted, I celebrate for him. I say, that is so awesome. And I may not feel it at first, but I can fake it at least, right? And they taught me how to fake it till you make it. And so I would just fake it. Man, I'm so happy for you. Way to go. Take him out to dinner. Celebrate something. And after a while, my feelings would catch up with my good thoughts and my good behavior. So many people think that you have to feel it first before you can actually do it. And that is a load of crap. You got to think it and you got to do it before you feel it. And so I would celebrate these different things that would happen, and my jealousy got better. It didn't go totally away, but it got better. I also had an issue with guilt. Guilt and shame over the things that I had done, the people that I had hurt. And guilt says this. Guilt says, I owe you. And so I would walk around thinking like I owed everybody. Oh, man, I owe them to be better. I owe them money. I owe whatever I owed people. And I would feel guilty about all these things. And this guilt, if you're walking around filled with guilt, you create a culture, just a little micro-culture of suspicion all around you. When I was out there drinking and avoiding everybody, guess what my wife thought I was doing? She thought I was hooking up with somebody. I was so guilty whenever I'd be home that she thought I was cheating on her with another woman. I didn't know this until after I got sober, and she told me, she said, I was sure that you were having an affair because my guilt created that environment of suspicion. And guilt keeps your relationship shallow. I know it's hard, I give you these crazy questions. Please bare your soul to your neighbor that you just met tonight, right? But when we feel guilty, we stay at that level where it's impossible for us to go deep. We don't want to go deep because someone might scratch the surface of something that I'm ashamed of, something that I'm not quite ready to deal with or give up. And so if we're walking around as guilty people, we stay in that place. Another thing I had to deal with was greed. The way out of guilt is to tell the truth. It's that simple. Tell on yourself. James 5:16 says, confess your sins to each other that you might be healed. Confession is a pathway to healing in life and in relationships. If you've got some guilt, you've got to tell on yourself. Another thing I had was greed. Anybody deal with greed? 2 people. Y'all are a bunch of liars. Anybody deal with lying? Right? Okay. I was greedy, and greed says that I owe me. I got to do something for I got to get mine because no one else is going to give it for me. But greed buys into the lie of scarcity. Greed says there's not enough in the world for everybody, so I have to get mine and keep it and protect it, and I can't share it with anybody. And greed buys into the lie of identity, that if you're going to be a real man, if you're going to be a successful man, you have to do better than everybody else around you. You have to have more than your neighbor. And you better not, you rub it in their face and you let them know how well you're doing. Those are the lies of greed. And thankfully, greed has the most simple fix of all of these character defects. And what's the fix to greed? Generosity. Share. Give away. Write a check. The best way to deal with your greed is to write a check that is more than you think you can afford to support something that you know is better than just you being comfortable. Because if you're writing checks that are easily affordable, people might be impressed, but God is not impressed. But if you're writing something more, if you're giving away more than you think you're comfortable giving, now you have started to overcome the problem of greed in your life. And let's not forget the issue of sex, all right? I got two buddies. I sponsor both of them. They're alcoholics, but what they really have is a problem with sex addiction. One of my buddies is serving a 3.5-year prison sentence because he was so into pornography that he would just download thousands and thousands of images and videos. And in that downloading of images and videos, he probably had a half a dozen of child pornography in there. And the feds got onto this. And they came into his house and they took all of his things and they found these images of child pornography among the tens of thousands of other images that he had. And they locked his butt up for 3.5 years. It had taken over his life and he couldn't control it. And I got another buddy named Ty that I work with. And Ty is addicted to prostitutes. He was a worship leader at a church. And he is the most loving, wonderful guy you've ever met in your life. But he can't stop paying for hookers. It's the craziest thing. He's got this obsession, this terrible addiction. And it started small. It started with little things. And then it grew and it snowballed and it took over his life. And he just got back into another halfway house because he can't get a handle on this addiction. And lust is a problem for almost every man on earth. In my 90 days of researching sex and the lust that was causing me problems in life, I discovered that sex and lust and masturbation and pornography, all these things are all about having a little bit of control over your life and getting a little bit of peace. You see, what happens to your brain when you're into all these other kind of things is the same kind of stuff that happens when you're on heroin. Sex and lust, it taps into your oxytocin and it taps into your serotonin in your brain, which are the same chemicals that heroin triggers. And all heroin does is it makes you feel really high, and then it gives you this sense of peace and ease and comfort, and that's what we're after. And that's what sex does for us. It makes us feel really high, and then at the end of the day, whew. And when you're with your wife, it's the most amazing thing in the world, because you can say, honey, it's been a hard day, man. We paid all the bills, we took care of the kids. Let's go get high, right? You go in the back room and you do what you do. And it's great and you feel high. And then you feel a sense of peace. And if you're like me, you fall right asleep. It's the most beautiful thing in the world, right? But when we go outside of those God-given places, if we go outside of our marriage to other people, if we just go outside of our marriage in our own minds, we're short-circuiting His plan for us. And it causes us no end of problems. And as I was going through these things, with greed and lust and jealousy and all these things, something became very clear to me. There were certain things, certain defects that could be amputated from my life. Drugs, alcohol, stuff like that. There is no God-given instinct in me that needs to have a drink. Sometimes it felt like it, but there's not. And so when God overcomes something like that, it is completely amputated from a person's life. But there are other things that have these God-given instincts. I have a sex instinct in me, and it's strong. And I have a fear instinct in me. Because there's times when a bear comes out of the way, I'll be the first person out this door, and good luck to all of you, right? Because fear is something that's there. And so anything that's attached to a God-given instinct, it may not get, and it probably will not get amputated from your life. It's going to be something that you wrestle with and you struggle with. And you'll see some progress, but you'll fall back into it and you'll have to get some more progress going. So I just want you to know that. You're not going to overcome completely all these defects of character. And that's okay. And God knows you're weak. He knows this, but He still wants you to come and wrestle with these things with Him. One of the best things I learned about overcoming sex and lust issues was that I needed to sit down and construct an ideal with God. I said, God, what do you want my sex life to look like? I work with a lot of guys in recovery, and that's one of the things we're supposed to do. We're supposed to sit down and construct the sex ideal with God. And I said, all right, we're going to construct a sex ideal. And those guys are like, yeah, right? I want as many chicks as possible at the same time. That's their whole sex ideal. And I'm like, you didn't let me finish. You have to construct a sex ideal with God. Now, you ask God if He wants you to be sleeping around with all these women, right? You're like, But when we sit there and we say, God, what do you want to give me? And what that did for me was I never cheated on my wife, but I was sure selfish. I sure thought about my own pleasure before hers. I sure took advantage of the situation so many times, and God convicted me and said, you got to be a giver. You have to put her first. You have to think about her desires and her needs. And the coolest thing is when you start doing that kind of stuff, it all comes back in wonderful ways. Anne Voskamp said this. She said, your skin is just the outer layer of your spirit. It's not a trifling thing when we use our bodies in ways that we shouldn't. We are damaging our souls when we do that. I'm out of time. I'm going to close with this. One warning. When you're working on your own stuff, you're letting God change you. By no means try to change other people, okay? You keep your eyes on your own stuff. I was 7 months sober, and I came home one day, and I'd been working on my life, and God was rocking and rolling me, and I looked at my wife, and I said, honey, the garage is a mess. And that's all your stuff in there. I haven't been able to use my garage since the day I got married. That's all your stuff in there. You just keep collecting more and more stuff. And I said, honey, I think God wants you to work on that. She took off her wedding ring, and she threw it at me. And she said, F you and all your effing AA buddies. She was mad. And I shut up. And I've never told her to work on anything another day in her life. I learned a valuable lesson that day. But I'll tell you what, a year into my sobriety, all the changes that God had made, and me keeping my big fat mouth shut, she woke up one day and she said, I think God's convicting me that He wants me to work on my own stuff. And so this non-alcoholic went and got a sponsor, and she started working the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous to overcome whatever she was dealing with. She's a codependent, so she started dealing with codependency. And we've been walking this path together for almost 5 years now, living by the same principles, and our marriage and our parenting and our whole lives are wonderful. We walked through this cancer situation this last year with our heads held high and our faith intact because we were walking this path together. Gandhi said this. He said, be the change that you want to see in the world. And he admits in his writings he stole that. You know who he stole that from? Jesus. He read the teachings of Jesus, and he saw the best man who ever lived. And he said, be the change you want to see in the world, just like Jesus was. We have an advantage over Gandhi. We have the Holy Spirit of Jesus in us. Look at your character defects. Pick which one is causing you the most problem and ask God what He wants to give you instead of that defect. Thanks for letting me share with you guys this morning.